25th Hour Radio Show.
So, Nick, I guess the most obvious place to start is with the murder you were charged with. Can you give us a little detail on the actual crime and how you initially were connected to the case?
Yes, sir. The murder in question began on December 15th, 1981, when Linda Mae Craig was leaving her workplace in the Tri-State Mall. She left work at 4 o'clock, and her watch was found broken on her wrist at 4:05 p.m. She was abducted in the parking lot because her shoes were recovered there, and she was driven into Pennsylvania from the state of Delaware 2 miles near her home, where she was raped and stabbed to death and dumped in a parking lot of a church. Her car was then driven 2 miles further, left with the interior lights on and all the doors locked, the killer's gloves left as a signature for the police on the front seat. I had nothing to do with this crime, but it was on the front page of a newspaper that had accompanied me when I landed in the Delaware County Prison. I landed there because on December 20th, 1981, I was driving through the city of Chester, Pennsylvania, when I was stopped by patrolman Benjamin Wright. I was high on drugs, and I had just run a stop sign. He walked up to my car and started banging on the window. The radio was still playing, and I couldn't understand him because I suffer from a brain disorder called aphasia. And it happened because of a childhood injury where I was attacked by a young man when I was 7 years old who beat my head in with a rock. And because of my drug use, I used the worst drug possible, methamphetamine, and it blew my mind out. So when something like this happened and Officer Wright walked up, I just couldn't respond to him. He yanked me from the car, put me against it, put his forearm to my throat, and pushed backwards, and I resisted. When I did, he got angry, and he reached for his gun. When he did, I grabbed his wrist, and the gun went off into the ground. I started yelling, okay, and he put me in the back seat of the car, and it was over. But then he got in the front seat, composed himself for a moment, and then he got on the phone and started yelling, shots fired, officer, assist, help, help, I'm under attack, as if he was still being attacked by me. And I couldn't understand why he did so. In short order, I was thrown into that cell with that newspaper in the Delaware County Prison and charged with attempted murder of a police officer, and I lost it. It was 4 days before Christmas. I was 20 years old, and I'd had no hope of beating the charges of attempted murder against a police officer when I was a drug addict loser. I sat there for days stewing about my situation, and I stupidly did the most horrific thing of my life. I made up a story that I would make to tell the police about that murder that seemed like a great mystery that no one would understand. And so I went forward and told the police a story. They soon found out I was a liar, but then they put me back in prison, and they put a prisoner in the cell next to me who had burglarized the prosecutor home, and it was he who said I confessed to him of this murder. And they charged me with this crime that I had nothing to do with.
So being innocent of this crime, I mean, was that the only evidence they had against you? I mean, they somehow manufactured this evidence, right?
Yeah, that's the scary part. Once they determined that I was a liar, they then said, you must do either one. And then they made up a motive. They said that I went out and stalked Mrs. Craig because she bore a likeness to my 20-year-old girlfriend I'd broken up with, and that I must have been mentally despondent by it and went out and stalked her out of some mental fit. And they made me out to be some kind of mental derelict, and they tortured me. They told the local prison gang, the Pagans, that I was a informant, hoping that I would have so much pressure put upon me by doing so that I would come forward with the truth to the police, only to have me assaulted, nearly killed, and hang myself. When that went badly, they then moved me out of the county jail and put me in Chester County Prison while I went through the first trial. I was acquitted by a jury of all the charges by Officer Benjamin Wright. My original charges were taken off me after only 20 minutes of deliberation, but that only made things worse for me, Randy. They then decided to seek the death penalty against me the very next week by the very same prosecutor and the very same judge that just lost the first trial. And from that point on, I was given a 3-day capital murder trial at the age of 20 years old. It was a joke. They made so much folly of me in the press that they questioned why I should be even given a fair trial when some nut just like me shot the president. So it was a very terrible time in the early 80s to go to trial for a crime like this.
Mm-hmm. So for us that have no idea, except for the terminology, what is death row? I mean, what's it like? I mean, how did you stay sane through all this period in your life?
Yeah, I landed it in the old system. I was sentenced to the electric chair. It was so long ago, and I was 20 years old, and they put me in hell in Huntington Prison. And at the time, it was the only prison in America ever condemned by the United Nations for its active practices of torture. They had just removed a unit that they were using in there where they kept the lights on 24 hours and made you stay awake for days, and so they broke you mentally to stop you from talking. That's it, just talking in your cell. When I got off the bus, they beat me for 30 seconds, threw me in the cell, and then the worst experience of my life took place from a female. A nurse walked up to my cell and then correctly read out by rote how I should use the system to file a request slip to see a doctor if I should need one. And when I failed to respond to the things she was saying to me, an officer stood next to her just repeatedly saying, "Inmate refuses to speak," knowing that I wasn't going to say a word to what they had just done to me while I stood there with my face bleeding. Mm-hmm. They didn't care.
Now, you actually begged for death at one point, right?
Yeah, I went through an arduous task well before that. I mean, my folly began when I escaped from death row in 1985 and was on the FBI's most wanted list for 25 days until I had my father call the FBI and turn myself in. And I did that knowing that I would suffer a great deal more. And they put me in Florida's death row next to Ted Bundy and cooked me down there for a summer until they added 30-some years to my sentence and sent me back to Pennsylvania. So, yes, I became the first guy on death row in 1988 to ask for DNA testing to prove my innocence. But it took me 15 long, agonizing years. And part of it was they destroyed all of the autopsy material in an effort to try and seal my fate. And they pushed me to the extreme of being so sick from hepatitis C that I asked to be executed. I didn't want to lose the person that I had developed into and worked so hard for, because I don't know how to tell you guys this, but I didn't try to educate myself and grow so I could be some badass when I got out of jail. I just wanted on my last day to be able to quote something so beautiful that they would recognize that I had erased the scumbag, thieving liar that I was and became someone decent and loving towards others while incarcerated, that I could show that I had beaten them to the race to erase me from this earth in a way that they could never touch, and to do so to make my parents proud, because my mom and dad were with me at dinner. The things that they did to my family were so terrible because I had witnesses with me at the time of the murder.
So tell me about these Gladiator Games you were forced to participate in.
Yeah, it's a shame, but in a weird way, it was used by the guards to keep them from killing each other. In the early 80s, so many prisoners got crammed into our prison systems that we ended up having a lot of black officers from the major cities move up into the mountain area to deal with all these extra shifts of guards that were needed. And they were witnessing brutality being aimed at black prisoners. And it was really disturbing that officers would fight amongst themselves. So this clever-ass captain came up with an idea. Pick out a black prisoner, pick out a white one, let them fight, and the guards will use that as a vicarious way of taking out their anger and frustration on themselves without officers being involved. So it was a weird scenario where I watched as men had to fight each other merely for the amusement of the officers, who then felt relieved from this anguish amongst themselves.
So, Nick, how did your case get brought up for review in the first place? I mean, that's really not normal, right, for inmates on death row?
Well, see, I went through the extreme of fighting and fighting and fighting. Because I was the first death row prisoner, I kept having to go between the state and federal court. And it's a shame that I went on in such a prolonged fashion, because the state court was adamant about denying me DNA efforts. And they kept it in the state court as long as they possibly could, and did all they could to hope that I would die by my own hand or someone else in the meanwhile. And we look back now, and I could have been executed. I came within as close as 60 days, and yet here it is. DNA has proven 3 different results that I'm not the killer. I didn't leave my semen there. It wasn't my skin cell under her fingernails, and it wasn't my DNA inside the killer's gloves left in that car like I described.
Mm-hmm. Well, how did you react to the news that you had been cleared of murder and, you were set to be released?
it was awkward because I was told of the results in July of 2003, and it was my lawyer from Philadelphia, from the Federal Defender's Office, who had represented me for 7 years, and he told me the results of the testing by Dr. Edward Blake in California, and then he started to tell me, well, when I pointed out to him how it proved me innocent, he then described to me how everyone in the office seems a little shamefaced this morning because they all thought I was crazy and they didn't actually believe I was innocent. And it was like one of those awkward moments, like he's trying to reveal in a self-depreciating manner how he has been wrong about me, but I didn't have time for that. So I hung up the phone from him, and I called my mother and told her, and she started to cry because my brother was having a seizure at her feet at the time. Mm-hmm. So it was so not what I expected. I thought there would be a celebration. In fact, it went the other way. It took them 8 months to let me go. They took me off death row and they put me in a mental cell, and they told me, if we open the door, you're going to kill one of us for what we did to you. And I said, no, I'm not. I'm not going to waste my time on you.
So how was it? You just, like, the day you were set free, they just opened the door and they say, you know, see you later?
You would think that, but they botched my release at 8 a.m. They told me goodbye. They packed all my stuff. They put me in a van on January 16th at 7:30 a.m. They drove me up to the front gate. I said goodbye to the officers. We were talking about the first things I was going to eat, and they stopped me at the second gate, and they said, take him back. His escape paperwork from Florida is not done yet. Mm. And my lawyers had to fly from Fort Lauderdale to Tallahassee, Florida, to get me released that day. For 5 hours, I sat in a cell waiting in anguish if they'd get it right that day. And so it was so weird that I ended up walking outside, and instead of saying a word about what they had just done, I asked that they please come back and revisit my friend Walter Ogrod and Ernie Simmons, who were on death row behind me, and how they too were innocent like me, and I walked off.
Well, how did
no
you?
Point at that point.
Wow, how did you adapt to life, you know, outside of prison, man? After all those years of solitary confinement, right? What was it? That must have been like a prison in itself, especially in the beginning.
It was a freedom into itself because I had my own schedule. I read thousands and thousands of books. I communicated with people all over the world. I circumnavigated the planet with sending my hair to pen pals all over the world. I grew, and I had this wonderful experience inside that cell because I was in solitary confinement 23 hours a day. It was my world. And I grew from age 20 to age 42 in there, and I became this really different person, and I became proud of who I was. So when they let me out, I just wanted to share that. I wasn't seeing it the way you did. I was only separated from society by the barriers that were created in my mind, and I realized that and let them go. And I moved to England. I lived there for the last 9 years. I've now come back to the United States to develop my film. I just got married on January 16, 2014. I'm so happy that I've turned towards the positive and actually went and lived my life before telling this story now. So people actually can see that I'm not selling them the hope of what I might have, but what the life I've done in the last 10 years of my living.
You know, was there ever any contact between you and the family of the victim after your name had been cleared?
Yeah, there was back and forth, but shamefully, because the prosecutor wanted to make out that even though DNA evidence came back and it's not mine, I'm still somehow connected to the crime. So that family has hated me for so long that they can't let go of that. And it's one of those weird things that even members of my family couldn't let go of the anger towards me because they weren't there at dinner or they didn't know the events of the night, and they didn't care because I used to be a junkie and a thief. Mm-hmm. See, this is where we go back to. I'm not a victim of an overall scheme. I put myself in the center of the storm by my own stupid acts. It was only down to me to pay for it in efforts I've made since then. And part of it was when I was released, I even fought for the victim by going out every Monday to the courthouse and protesting until they put the DNA into the FBI's databank to try and catch the man who killed her. Mm-hmm. I felt that that was important, that I finalized that continued effort to try and change who I was for what I did. None one has to live with that. What was done to me, the cruelty and the times that I have been hurt, others have to live with that.
So what has your life been like since you've been released? What have you done to try to make up for all those years?
Ride. Yeah, it's been a rocket ride through every human emotion. I'm no different than you and Bob. I mean, you guys go through the same things as I do. The frustrations, the immediacy of emotion, all of these things are back in my life now, and I have to deal with them. Paying bills and struggling and worrying if my wife and I will make it in the United States, and going through the processes that we are. We're struggling for having a child. We're facing difficulties. We get frustrated just like everyone else, but we have the understanding that things have been truly worse for us, so we can hang on knowing that this isn't the worst of it. We're all right. I think that's what I want to share more than anything, that through the perseverance of actually caring about other human beings, you can overcome the things that are done to you. It's just that you can't give up on love.
Now, I know you got a book out, right? And I think even a documentary is being released in January.
Yes, sir. I have a book out called 7 Days to Live. People can find me on my website, nickjyarris.net, or find it on Amazon, Kindle. And I'm very grateful to the actor Mike Farrell, who's written a great blurb about it. I just got a 4 out of 4-star review about the book. I'm very happy for the opportunity to promote it with the documentary that's coming out in January as well. So it looks like not being an arrogant asshole for what they did to me has paid off, and I'm glad. I'm glad that I didn't become bitter, and I'm glad that I didn't use what they did to me as a crutch, because it's just too easy. And I'm just so happy that it's rewarded me now with someone like you taking the time to let me speak today.
You know, is there anything else we haven't covered you'd like to mention before we start to wrap things up here?
Oh, yeah. Every copy of my book sold, I will make a donation to the Innocence Project to help them, because 86 people were proven innocent last year, and another 63 this year so far. Even people on death row proven innocent by DNA this year alone. And I think as long as I can contribute, that's my goal, to help others never have to ask to be executed in the manner that I did.
Now, you mentioned your website, but do you do social media or anything like that where people can go and keep up with you?
Can find me. Yeah, my name is Nick, Yarris, and you can find me on Facebook. I have a professional page and a personal one, and I like the opportunity that I get to share a lot of my life in that manner. I really am grateful for the opportunity I have with CNN and other major national television networks I'm going to do in the future too. So if I ever come back and get a chance to do this again, I definitely will. You guys have been so gracious towards me, and I can't help but be grateful.
Well, Nick, it's been a pleasure talking to you, hearing your story. It is an amazing story. I'm glad things worked out for you. Your name has been cleared of that terrible crime, and thanks for joining us this afternoon on the show.
Thank you, guys. I really appreciate it. I'm so happy for you guys. Go and enjoy the rest of your day.
The 25th Hour Radio Show.